Hi, this is Bob McCarty. Today I'm going to do something I don't very often do. I'm going to conduct a Skype interview with a man who's facing charges that could land him behind bars for 58 years. He's Army Major Christian Kit Martin. Major Martin is a career regular Army officer, a U.S. Army Ranger, and a Master Army aviator with some 1,000 hours of combat flying time, including 500 while using night vision gear. Now 47 years old, he's been to war and back 3 times and is one of those rare soldiers who has fought both on the ground as an elite Army Ranger and in the air as an attack helicopter pilot. Still, nothing could have prepared him for the battle he's fighting now, trying to avoid becoming the next victim of the Pentagon's sexual assault witch hunt. Well, first, welcome to the show here.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
We'll have plenty of ugly details to get into, but before we start, tell us something about your background leading up to you joining the Army, and then we'll pick it up from there.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I come from a long family has a long history of military service, as far back as I can trace right now. My dad was in the Air Force, 30 years, a Chief Master Sergeant. My sister also was in the Air Force, retired as a nurse after doing 20 years. So after my dad got back from Vietnam, we moved to Europe when I was about 2, and I stayed there till I was in high school. That had a lot of pros and cons. Got to move, travel a lot, see have a lot of cultural experiences, which is all good. You get to appreciate America, what it stands for, see that in other people's eyes. The cons were, we're on the front line of the Cold War at the time, and we didn't know if the Soviets were going to come across the border any day. We also had to move every 2 to 3 years, which was hard as a child. New schools, new friends, constantly, but it's the price you have to pay. And I also missed out on some American cultural experiences, obviously, especially with sports. Like I said, my family history and my experiences led me to want to be in the service myself. I decided to follow in my grandfather's footsteps in the cavalry. So right before I graduated high school, I was 17. I joined the Army Reserves as a private. I got my Eagle Scout right then as well, and then I went to basic and AIT. And after that, I went to the University of Nebraska and tried to pay my own way through school. So I worked full-time at night, did reserves on the weekends, and then also did ROTC. Later on, I was able to compete for an Army scholarship. That gave me a regular Army commission. And from there, I was able to go to Ranger School. My first duty assignment was at Fort Ord, California, with the 7th Infantry Division Light. So I'm kind of dating myself there a little bit. I'm pretty old. When they disbanded the 7th, I went with the 9th Infantry Regiment to Fort Lewis, Washington, and there I fell under the 2nd of the 8th Field Artillery.
Okay. Now, I was reading about you. Right after college, you married your wife, Stacy, and early in your career, you had a chance to work for a gentleman by the name of Ray Odierno. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but he was a lieutenant colonel then, but he went on to put on 4 stars and become chief of staff of the Army, right?
That's correct, yes.
All right. Now, way back then, he wrote an officer evaluation of you, describing you as a top-of-the-line officer and an officer of unquestionable integrity. That must have made you feel pretty good.
Yeah, it did, of course. I was very optimistic back then, and just trying to learn from leaders such as him. Try to emulate those leaders and learn from them as much as you can. It's not until you get a little more senior and you see the system that you realize how political that system really is and the pressures that those leaders face.
Yeah, and it's kind of like being, moving up into corporate ranks at the top. There's politics in any field. But still, you stayed in the Army for, well over 2 decades. And but let me go back to now just recently retired General Odierno. I mean, on top of working for him, I mean, that must have been an experience. You didn't know where he would end up, but aside from working for him, you had what many guys out in the hinterlands might consider a dream job. As an Army Ranger, you get to fire all sorts of guns and play with, things that blow up. And then you get to fly attack helicopters, right out of the video game world. And probably better because they make real things happen. I mean, what was that like?
That was always my dream to fly eventually. When I was in high school, I had read a lot of books about Vietnam and Army Rangers specifically, and helicopter pilots, especially Cobra pilots. So that's something I always wanted to do. But I had to fight for that dream. The Army originally wanted me to be a communications officer, signal officer. So I had to make a decision down the road, career versus family, and I chose family. But that also offered me the opportunity to go in the Guard and go to flight school, and that's what I did. And then I've been able to fly just about every helicopter from the Vietnam War up to modern times. So I've been very fortunate in that regard. But there's always a price to pay. In my case, it's mostly physical,
right.
Physical injuries. But the taxpayers have spent a lot of money on schools and education for me, and I greatly appreciate that. In return, I've tried to step up whenever the country's needed, veterans and go to war. And been shot at more times than I can count and remember.
Right. Which was your favorite helicopter, I have to ask?
Just for the pure joy of flying, I would have to say the Cobra.
Is that a one-seater or two-seater?
It's a two-seater. It's very similar to the Apache. It was really the world's first attack helicopter.
Oh.
If you had to go to war, though, you really want the capabilities of the Apache longbow.
Okay. And that's what you were flying most recent?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, away from the fun and games of flying helicopters and making things blow up, let me go back. You had married the love of your life, your first wife, in early 2004. And without getting into too many details, describe that period of your life and how you and your wife moved forward from then.
Yeah, well, we met in ROTC, and she was a little older than I was. I married pretty young. I was only 23. That was 1993, I believe. And then when she came to California with me, but they could tell the Army life wasn't really for her. So we decided, like I said, family over career. I got out of the military on active duty, and we moved back to her hometown. And then I worked this different civilian careers, worked my way up to 9/11. I was 33. I was making six figures at that point. But that had a cost as well of being away from home a lot of travel, working in Nashville, and later working in Atlanta. And she asked for a divorce, and I agreed, and we tried to make it as amicable as possible for the children.
You had 3 children with her?
Yes.
All
right. I started with a daughter and then 2 sons.
Okay. And you're still good relationship with those children, and even with your ex-wife.
Yeah, I'm still on very good terms with my ex-wife and her family.
And she remarried pretty soon after the divorce, within a year, right?
Yes.
Okay. And so you moved on. Well, what else can you do? You pick up the life, and you met a woman online. I think she said the Yahoo Personals, or she contacted you, and a dating relationship began. Can you give us a brief recap of what that was like?
Sure. I never really dated before, just because of moving, my family's history and everything. So that was my first real experience with dating. And with my work, I didn't really have a lot of time and opportunity to meet a lot of women. So I thought I would try the Yahoo Personals online. It seemed like a good idea. She contacted me, and I was surprised by how much we seemed to have in common, almost a little too much. It's kind of the first red flag there. Once we started dating, she told me about her past. She said that she had 3 children. The oldest was 7 at the time, a boy. She told me that his father had died before he was born in a logging accident. He had been decapitated. That's a story you just don't forget. She also had 2 young girls, 2 and 9 months. Their father, she was supposedly just divorced from. And after we had dated a little bit, she told me the concerns that she had, that he was apparently stalking her, threatening her, breaking into her apartment. And he had actually sexually assaulted her and actually sexually molesting the girls. And, I just couldn't believe that. And I felt that I needed to do something to try to help her. So at that point, I volunteered to rent a U-Haul for her, move all her items to a rental house that I owned at that time, and I set the children and her up there, free of charge. I even gave them some money for groceries and things like that, so they could get by, so she could readjust. And at that point, I just basically stopped dating her. I didn't see that was good for me to do that anymore. But that led to where I found that some more red flags or stories didn't start to match up. And after I broke it off, she contacted me and told me that her brother had died in Iraq. So being in the service, I went to console her. We kind of made amends, and we eventually started dating again. And that led to a marriage in December 7th, 2004.
December 7th. That's quite a date to get married on, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, we're actually going just to get a marriage license. But time was short because I was being called to active duty, and I wanted to have them with me if possible. And I kind of had to make a decision. I was going to commit to that family or go on my separate ways. And by that time, I had really become committed to the children, and it was kind of like a second chance for me to have that family again. And
right.
I've basically always been a family man, so I really missed having my biological children around all the time. So this was another opportunity I saw, to have that family again.
So she had 2 daughters, and the oldest was a son. So you get married. Short time later, you're back on active duty. You go to Germany as a 5-year stint, and you had 3 tours in Iraq, if I'm not mistaken. Correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Tell me about Iraq. Tell me about your time there. Not the blood and guts, but how did it change you as a man? Let's say.
Well, like I said, after when I saw the images of 9/11, when I was working in Atlanta, I determined at that point I wanted to do whatever I could to try and get back on active duty and fight for my country. So when the opportunity arose in 2005, I applied for an opening that they had. I was accepted pretty quickly back on active duty, went through the Petzl course, and then we were assigned to Germany. Usually that's a 3-year stint, but this turned into 5 years. And like I said, we had 3 deployments. The first was right after I arrived. The brigade commander asked me to take a mid-team deployment. So I served on the ground in Baghdad in 06 and 07 during the height of the insurgency with 1-1 Commando Battalion as an Iraqi advisor. I thought I knew what was going on in Iraq at that time, watching the news and studying the history and things like that. But when I got there, I realized it was so complicated that I really didn't have an idea what was, and I had to learn all that. But that set me up well for my later deployments as a operations officer for an attack battalion, where I could understand what was happening on the ground probably a little better than maybe some of my peers were able to do. So I saw, like I said, I saw a lot of combat, saw a lot of death on the ground, and then in the air. And be honest, when I got back from my first tour, I really thought the war was unwinnable. That was just prior to the surge was just kind of kicking off at that point. But things turned around, and we were able to make some pretty good changes, I thought.
Right. So you finish your stint in Germany with all those deployments to Iraq. Get an opportunity to go back to school at Navy War College. You do that, get your master's, and you had your family. Okay. So you get your master's. Your first assignment post-war college is back to Fort Campbell, and your adult. How old was your daughter? You had an adult daughter from your first marriage that moved in with you?
Yeah, she was 19 at the time,
19?
And she was starting to go to Austin Peay State University.
Okay.
So she moved in with us. So it was nice to have her and the ability to reconnect with her and my sons after having been away so long overseas and at school.
So your relationship was still very good with her and your other sons. So is after you began, you'd returned to Fort Campbell, you're working in 101st Airborne Division, and things started to go south. Can you describe a little bit of what began to happen?
Well, we had bought an old house to fix up because she said she knew how to do that, and we had bought basically a small farm because we wanted the children to have that experience, just like my biological children had. I'd had a small farm, horse farm back then. We wanted to give them the opportunity to grow up with animals, learn some responsibilities and chores and things like that. But she quickly lost interest in fixing up the house, working on the farm, and it became apparent pretty quickly that she was having an affair with our married neighbor. She became very controlling, very difficult, always trying to get into a fight, verbal argument with me, often in front of the children. And that kind of came to a head on the night of September 5th, 2012. And she, again, started an argument with me in front of the children, and I told her at that point that I just wanted a divorce. I didn't want to go through this anymore. My adult daughter was there, and her immediate response was, and I quote, if you divorce me, I will ruin your career. I will ruin your life. I know how to do it. And then she started to list other threats that she was going to do. At that point, I just said, hey, she said, I'm going to tell him you're abusive. And I'm like, you need to call the police if you think you're being abused. And then I was like, well, you know what, I'll go down and call the police. So I went downstairs, I called the police, and I could tell she was shocked that I had done that. And the sheriff's department sent 3 deputies out, and they talked to everybody, investigated, determined nothing physical had happened, and then asked me to leave for the night. So my daughter and I went and got in a hotel room. The next day I thought I'd come home and we would just sort things out, determine what we wanted to do, but that didn't work out that way.
Right. So that led to more issues. If she couldn't get the local law enforcement guys to brand you as a wife abuser or whatever she wanted to describe you as, she started laying out false accusations against you. Can you tell me a little bit about the first set of allegations?
Well, apparently she has a history of doing this, and I didn't know it at the time, but the first thing she did, the very next day, first thing in the morning, she went to a judge and got an EPO, emergency protection order, against me. And then I was served with that later, and basically my daughter and I were thrown out of our own house. And with an EPO, there's no evidence required. The judge had talked to the police officers, he would know that nothing had happened, but that's not the procedure. They just give the EPO. The recipient of it is forced to leave their house. I had to turn over all my firearms, and that basically gave her carte blanche on my house for 2 weeks. She and her boyfriend then stripped it of everything they could carry, all my family heirlooms, documents, things of that nature. My daughter and I had to stay in hotel rooms and barracks until the EPO hearing 2 weeks later. When the EPO hearing, we had that, she was caught lying in church, and that too, caught lying in the courtroom, and that was all recorded on video. Or worse yet, she was caught making her children lie, and that was all documented as well, with a basic witness tampering. The EPO was thrown out, which is, I heard, very rare that actually happens, that the EPO is denied. She was denied the EPO. So since she couldn't accomplish her goals that way, she continued on with other agencies. She used Child Protective Services. She then claimed that I had not only abused her, but I had abused her children. She also went to the Army Family Advocacy Program, FAP, complained to them, and all they require is an allegation, and the policy letter 7 kicks in, and you have to face a whole slew of negative actions against you. So those still didn't get her where she wanted to. There's some irregularities that came up with our divorce. My lawyer found some interesting information about her, and in retaliation for that, she then went with her boyfriend to the FBI and claimed that I was an international spy, and that all the trips that we had taken in Europe, all the cruises and family vacations, had actually been just a means for me to meet with foreign agents and give away secret information. And it is ludicrous, but
you got to admire she's creative.
It's very creative. And if you look at the story of this, if you read about it online, you'll see that she's actually following the main news stories of the day. The EPO, she called the military, that was right after some Special Forces spouse killings at Bragg. The stuff with the spying, that was right after the Snowden and Manning things had been in the media. So she kind of been following the media and kind of shadowing that,
right,
with all the accusations.
Right. Okay. So she levels all these accusations. Let's tackle the first two beyond the night where you asked her for the divorce. The first two allegations, that you're a spy, that you had stolen a laptop computer and CDs from somewhere, and she and her friend, maybe he's a lover, maybe he's just a co-conspirator, however you want to look at him. She reported to the FBI that you had stolen these things, and they were just doing their patriotic duty to turn them back in, and save the country from harm. Can you elaborate on that?
That's pretty much what they said. The statement's pretty funny when you read it. There was no doubt that they were having an affair. Everybody in town knew about it. They actually had the local police officer walking on them in the act one time. That was about 6 months before I requested a divorce. And after we tried counseling at that point, but that failed as well. So the FBI turned this over to Army counterintelligence. They did a secret surveillance on me I didn't know about for 6 months. I guess they were checking my emails and things like that. Then they brought me in and interrogated me for about 3.5 hours. I fully cooperated, let them interrogate me, didn't ask for a lawyer. Should have, but I didn't. And then I insisted that they come out to my house and search my house, just in case there was some sort of chance that there was some classified information or material out there. I didn't want to risk that at all. So they came out, they searched my house, they found absolutely nothing. I even turned in some discs, some continuity discs that I had, like you use in your career, examples of documents and things like that. I gave them all of that. And then they asked me if I would take a polygraph, and I said, absolutely, I'll take a polygraph. I had to wait a couple months, and then they brought me in and they gave me a 3-hour polygraph. I did not expect it to take that long, but you can imagine the number of questions you can ask somebody in a 3-hour period. And they put me over the coals pretty well. And I can say that I could probably pass the polygraph. Most people probably couldn't pass the questions that they asked me. Have you ever done anything illegal? Have you ever falsified a document? Have you, ever done anything wrong? And they just went on. And at the end of it, they said, you've passed everything. We're really sorry. You'll hear no more about any of this.
Okay, so her first set of allegations are tossed out, deemed, false, for lack of a more descriptive term. Okay, let's move on from there. The second set of allegations where you allegedly, according to her, assaulted her, sodomized her, and sexually assaulted her children. The state of Kentucky, the Commonwealth of Kentucky, their division, usually most states call it Child Protective Services. I'm not sure what they were, but they found her claims were unsubstantiated in regards to assaults against the children, sexual or otherwise, right?
That's correct. Okay. They did that. They investigated about 4 months, and they determined that, and I think it was 3 January 2013.
Okay.
So, like I said, with that and with the counterintelligence, the polygraph, I thought she was finally done. She had done everything that she could to me. But at that point, I then wrote a congressional request that they look into the Kentucky EPO procedures and the Army Family Advocacy Program and the way that they blacklist soldiers and force them into counseling and things like that. So when that happened, there was an immediate backlash. I was transferred from I've been an acting battalion commander for an infantry brigade. I was moved immediately out of that. I was brought to the HHB headquarters for the division, and then I was secretly flagged. They flagged me and they didn't notify me, which is another violation of procedure. That led to me having to go to the IG 6 weeks later and actually request an investigation to determine that I had actually been flagged.
That's the Inspector General who's supposed to, supposed to hear whistleblowers, supposed to investigate things that don't pass a smell test. I just want to let, in case audience members don't know what IG is. Okay, sure. Continue.
Yeah, and there's actually an ongoing whistleblower investigation going on about this, but that's only recently been started. So the command then tried to launch a new investigation against me, this time with MPI, which is Military Police Investigations, over the laptop, saying that I had stolen this Army laptop. Again, I was treated as a criminal, interrogated several times. Their own investigation showed that this laptop would belong to an MI battalion in Fort Meade, Maryland, and came out of Army inventory in 2007. Well, I had never been to Fort Meade, Maryland. I'd never been in an MI battalion. And from 2005 to 2010, I was continuously in Iraq or Germany. I never got a chance to come back to the States and serve in any kind of unit here. So their own investigation pretty much cleared me, along with my polygraph. You still there?
This friend of the woman making the allegations, he used to work in a supply. He was like a 17-year NCO. For some reason, left the Army before he could retire, but he worked in the supply branch of the Army. You don't think he might have found that laptop and planted it somewhere?
We don't know, but that is an interesting set of facts. I've also been told recently that he went from being an NCO to working his way up to being a captain, and the Army was going to release him from the service due to mental instability, and he basically told him to stuff it and quit, and that's why he left the service with only 17 years and no retirement. He's also one of my private investigators has found that he was also charged in owning a brothel locally, and was also charged with domestic violence, but not against his wife. So it's an interesting character. And when I actually moved here, some of my neighbors had actually warned me about him right off the bat. You need to stay away from him.
Right.
Which I tried to do, but my wife did not.
Okay, so despite the outcomes of 2 investigations, which, the Army, CID, FBI passed the CID, they find you're clear. Then the state child welfare folks find you're clear. The staff judge advocate, who is the top legal advisor for the commanding general at Fort Campbell, he recommends against a court-martial going forward based on the findings so far. But then Brigadier General Mark Stammer decides he's going to ignore his legal advisor and press forward with court-martial against you. Have I got the facts straight?
Pretty much. What happened was, after the MPI investigation, despite the evidence and the polygraph that I'd taken, that investigation had been restarted by General Stammer. That's what I've been told. He tried to give me an Article 15. And you got to understand, an Article 15, it's a minor punishment, but it's a career-ending punishment, especially for an officer. And I never even had a counseling statement in my whole career. I've never even had a speeding ticket up to that point in the civilian world. So that was a big shock for me. And he had a reputation at that time that if you went before him, that you were going to get the Article 15. He wasn't really going to listen to you. They actually call him on Fort Campbell Stammer the Hammer. That's the name that everybody called him by, even in the JAG world. My family had also seen what was going on, and they had contacted him several times by email and threatened to go public with what was being done to me. That's when he started that second investigation. The CG had then come back from Afghanistan at that point, so the CG had given me an award in the past, and I thought I could talk to him. So I requested to speak with him and just asked for a different adjudicating authority, just somebody who was impartial. That's all I wanted to do.
Right.
What happened at that point was the JAG prosecutors blocked my meeting the same day that I was supposed to go meet with him. And I had now been separated from this woman for 18 months. But they went back to her and her boyfriend at that time looking for new allegations against me, which, of course, they were more than willing to help out with. And at that point, my meeting was canceled, and I found out I was under a new investigation, this time by CID, which is the Criminal Investigation Department or Division. I'm not sure what it is exactly.
Right, but the Army
so
investigation.
Now I'm facing a third new investigation.
Right, and as a result of that third investigation, your court-martial's moving forward, and as I understand things, you face the possibility of 58 years in prison if convicted on all charges.
So, yeah, when they went back to this woman, she basically raised the level of accusations now to the point of rape, sodomy against her, child molestation against her daughters, and physical abuse against her son. So she's basically going all in.
Right.
And she knew this was her last chance to ruin my career. Certain facts about the case came out, and actually everybody involved with the case, the prosecutors, the JAG, even the accusers recommended that I just resign at this point.
Right.
There's no charge, no penalty, just resign with a dishonorable discharge. I initially was going to go along with that just to save my family the worry, and my parents are elderly now. I didn't want them to have to go through that. But again, General Stammer came in and made sure that it's continued on to a court-martial. There was also an Article 32 hearing, which is a preliminary hearing, and the investigating officer there determined that he didn't think any of the charges should go forward. The sexual charges should go forward.
Right.
The witnesses' statements did not match up. She'd already made him lie in court, 2 weeks after she filed the EPO. Now she'd had the children alone for 18 months, and she was able to get them to lie again. But they saw through that, and but again, General Stammer stepped in and said, no, this needs to go to a court-martial.
Wow. So despite two different officers advising him against moving forward with charges against you, he opted to continue and to keep the pressure on, go to court-martial. To me, I would say that he was acting commanding general in lieu of the regular general who had been in Afghanistan. Do you think he was feeling the pressure of the political and Pentagon sexual assault mantra? You can't walk into a bathroom anywhere on a military base without seeing a poster that says, watch out for a man, he might assault you. Do you think he was under pressure?
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, I've been in the Army 29 years now. I have never seen a campaign like this recent one of the sexual assault and domestic violence. There's been a lot of campaigns of suicide awareness. That was a big problem a couple of years ago. Things like that, where you'll see some posters, you'll have to take some required training. But the level of in-your-face, constant, here it is, briefings, training, posters everywhere, even in the bathrooms, even in the stalls. I've never seen anything like that. So there's been a huge political pressure about this. And there's been a lot of unlawful command influence cases and examples that have come forward as a result of this.
Right.
Being pressured to increase their statistics of convictions.
So if I was just a man on the street hearing something about this case, I'm not sure if we touched on it much yet, but this woman who you thought you had legally married, the second marriage for you, your investigators found out that she had not been legally divorced from her husband, who's the father of two of her three children, the two girls. So she's, in effect, committed bigamy. And did anyone charge her for that?
Well, they have now in Kentucky. They also charge her in Tennessee. Again, the Army prosecutors stepped in and tried to get those charges dropped because that would affect their case against me.
How did they do that? What did they do in terms of, did they try to sweet talk the local prosecutors?
Sweet talk and then basically pressure them as
Right.
well. And as a result of that, there's going to be, this month, there's going to be an unlawful command influence and prosecutorial misconduct hearing about my case. And that's just a small part of what's going to be discussed.
Right, right. You've got some issues with the attorneys who pretended to be one thing when they were not two. That is, military attorneys. One said that she was not working for the prosecution or not working as a prosecutor. Turns out, right after you left a meeting with her, she communicated with the prosecutors, and you learn that she was actually a prosecutor at the time she said she wasn't. So it's hard to win when you're talking to the enemy in a legal case.
She was the only lawyer I knew at the time. When I had been an acting battalion commander, she had been the brigade legal. So she was the only one I knew, and she had told us that she was going to work the other side. So we all took that to mean she was going to be a defense attorney.
Right.
So when these charges initially came up, I went to talk to her, and she did not make it clear to me that she was a prosecutor. She said trial defense, I believe, or trial counsel, which
Right.
at the time I didn't understand that would meant prosecutor in
Right.
Army terms. So we talked about my case for a while, and she gave me some advice. But then, yes, she had recorded basically everything that I had said to her. There was nothing really damaging there because I hadn't done anything wrong, but she recorded it all and sent that in a memo to the prosecution. And I didn't even find out about that until probably a year and a half later. I was very shocked and disturbed by that.
Yeah, basically, you thought you had some form of attorney-client privilege, and in any case, you don't want to telegraph maybe what you're going to do in a courtroom to the other side, whether you're, in one case it may be an admission of some part of guilt, or it may be a strategy, or somewhere in between. But you don't want the other side to have that, because you want to get a fair trial and use all the quivers or all the arrows in your quiver to, get by. So anyway, well, so you got the acting commanding general, the military lawyers, some of them working against you. Now, is October 12th? Is that the date of your court martial coming up?
That's what it's scheduled for right now. Yes.
Okay, so go back to 1986, when you're young and just getting started toward an Army career. College, ROTC. Did you ever imagine anything in your wildest imagination? Did you ever imagine something like this could enter your life?
No, it's still unbelievable. Even though I've been dealing with this for almost 3 years now, sometimes it's hard to believe that it's really happening. It's not just some sort of bad dream.
Right. One other thing. You mentioned the charges that this woman leveled at you, the accusations. They were almost identical to some that she had leveled against her, against the father of her 2 girls. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So in the course of the investigation, when we discovered the bigamy, and I had gone to CID myself in January of 2013 and reported her as a bigamist. At that point, trying to cover myself for all the fraud and everything that she had committed. My private investigators have also discovered that she had essentially kidnapped her daughters from her still legal husband that she's still officially married to. And when she did that, she told me she was divorced and he was stalking her. None of that was true. They were still married. He was trying to communicate with her through a lawyer, and they were for divorce, but she just broke that off. And she filed an EPO against him. She had also filed an EPO against my real ex-wife. And she leveled charges against him that are almost identical to the ones that I'm now facing. That he had sexually assaulted her, that he had molested the girls, and that he had abused the boy. Apparently he was never served those charges. I guess they couldn't find him to serve them, but it's all on the record in Tennessee.
Wow. So nothing ever really came out of those charges. So maybe she thought she'd just try him again on you and see if a second time was the charm.
Or maybe third or fourth time. I don't know how many people she's done this to.
Right.
Like I said, we even found out that the father of the boy that was supposedly decapitated prior to him being born is actually still alive. He's in Clackamas, Oregon somewhere. And my private investigators are trying to locate him. So of her 3 children, none of them know their fathers. The girls thought I was their father until our separation. The boy thought his father's been dead his entire life. He's now 19. His father's still out there. So we don't know how many men she's done this to. She's essentially a professional con artist.
Right. But she dropped out of high school, did not attend college, even though she often told you she was taking online classes. She spent tons of your money on everything from psychics to a lot of questionable or less reputable expenses, let's say. And still, you're the one on trial, or getting ready to go on trial. General Stammer's obviously trying to protect his future. Since this case began, he was transferred. He is now in charge of Africa Command's Joint Combined Task Force on, what was that called? He's over in Africa. I can't remember the name of the task force, but so he's got a pretty good deal. He's got another star on his shoulder, and he's satisfied the political forces satisfied the Pentagon for not allowing an allegation to go unpunished. Again, I don't know if there's a question to come out of this. I think I already know your answer, but you just can't imagine. When I was an Air Force officer years ago, I never could have imagined these kinds of things could develop. That political pressure would so corrupt what was a great military system. Anyway, I'm off on a little tangent. I get a little upset. I'll back up. I think the reason we first came into contact was you became familiar with my first book, 3 Days in August. You heard about it through somebody. And for people who are not familiar with that, that's about the wrongful prosecution and conviction of an elite Army Green Beret on sexual assault charges while he was stationed in Germany. And since then, I've been contacted on sometimes weekly basis, at least once or twice a month over the past almost 4 years by people, family members. Sometimes it's a wife, sometimes a mother. Yeah, it's a wide assortment. They're calling, asking me to, give attention to the case of their loved one who is facing sexual assault charges that are a lot like yours. They don't have any merit. They're up against guys who, like you, had never had a speeding ticket. They had punched all the right tickets, the holes. They'd done everything right, only to have some woman file claims against them. So, what do you tell John Doe, John Q. Public out there, when he asks you, well, gosh, you got charges against you? Must be a little bit of truth to it, because this is the Army. They don't just charge people for no reason. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I understand that perspective. I had that myself until this happened to me, especially when I was serving as a commander. That we saw a lot of these similar type cases, and you think if somebody's going to a court martial, then they obviously must have done something wrong at some point. The Army wouldn't push something this far. It's not till you're on the other side of the curtain that you see how things are really stacked against you, and how far, especially JAG prosecutors, are willing to go. As you can see in my case, they essentially made this whole case up. That they knew she was a bigamist, they knew her history, and they, if they'd done a little homework, they would have found out her boyfriend's history. But yet they went to them in order to make up a case against me, just because I wouldn't accept an Article 15 from them. So this is more from a divorce to spy accusations to an Article 15 to now 13 new charges of sexual assault and violence. It's just insane. But that's what they're willing to do now. And unfortunately, if you watch the news, you'll see case after case of this. It's actually very similar to what's going on the college campuses right now. The date rape accusations. And it just takes one person to come forward and make an accusation, and your life is essentially, destroyed.
Right.
And that's my case.
And it's cost you how much? $100,000 so far? Or?
At least $100,000 in lawyers, private investigators. All my savings, basically. While I have been trying to prove my innocence, which is what you have to do over the past 3 years, my career has systematically been destroyed. So there's a fight you really can't win. They're going to get you one way or the other. If you do clear yourself of all the charges, then they've taken the steps necessary to destroy your career. I've been flagged for 2 years. I was given a bad evaluation. My last evaluation, the first bad one I've ever had, and essentially they wrote it, and then they even changed it after I had signed it. They re-signed it and submitted it the day before my promotion board, so that I didn't have an opportunity to do anything. So they've been guaranteed that I would not get promoted and get forced out of the Army, which is where I stand now. Even if I get myself clear of all these charges, by 1 February next year, I'll be out of the military without my 20-year retirement, my career over.
Right. So, you were on track. You started as a one-striper, or maybe even a slick sleeve. I don't know if that's what they call it in the Army.
Yeah, but they have your mosquito wings back then for U1, yeah.
Right, so you started at the entry level. You did everything right. You get to go into a program to become an officer. You not only excel in that program. You are the distinguished graduate of the ROTC program and the university at University of Nebraska Omaha. You're doing everything right. You're punching the right tickets. You work for the guy who becomes the man. You work for the guy who becomes the head of the Tennessee Army National Guard. I like to think that guys that work for guys that become successful are largely responsible for those for that success. When you work for a guy, you help him look good. It's going to make you look good. You were on track to at least get to 05, Lieutenant Colonel, except for these charges. Now, your freedom's at stake. Your ability to stay with your family and to retire and reap the rewards of decades of service. What do you tell people watching this video? What can they do on your behalf? What would you ask them to do?
Well, it's just, despite, like I said, it's not just about me. I'd ask them to contact their political leaders, kind of from the president on down, senators. If they want to learn more about my story and the details of it, they can look online at National Coalition for Men, The Voice for Men. Those organizations have taken up my cause. They did very thorough investigations. They've gone through thousands of documents to show this. They've written several stories. But like I said, this is going on with so many other soldiers, male and female, within the military right now. And it's really a crime. If they basically, the military is eating its own, really. We're under political pressure, and we're eating our own to satisfy that pressure. Essentially, if you look at it, it's a war against veterans. With a combination of the downsizing and all the sexual assault, domestic violence, political pressure, that's what's going on. And it's very sad to see it happen. And, like I said, I saw it a lot before it happened to me. Soldier, wife, or, man or woman, their spouse essentially is cheating on them, burning through all their savings. If they try to separate themselves from that person, what happened to me is essentially going to happen to them. And in my case, I wasn't even married, legally married. Found out that she wasn't even my wife. And they're still doing it to me. It could just be a one-night stand with somebody who decides the next day that they don't like you. And they make an accusation, and, this is what happens to you.
Right.
And unfortunately, the JAG prosecutors are willing at this point to make up cases against soldiers, as they have done against me, and will be proven. And it's very sad and unfortunate. But that's the reality that we're dealing with right now.
All right. Well, Major Martin, we pray for you and for your case, and we'll stay in touch, especially as your court date comes up next month. Thanks for spending time with us.